I like it. Oh, I'll just sit down. Thank you. Good morning. There's two things already I asked. The first is then pruning, which is the maintenance prune. The second thing is we have a group color this morning, and thinking of pruning and letting the light and the aeration is blue. So we all went for blue this morning. But true to the macadamia tree, there's anomalies that we don't always understand. Thanks a million. So what we have is farmers on the one side and then the experts on the other side. I'm going to sit down and discussing the priority topics. So we sat down and put a lot of topics on, put it through the mill again and again and see what came out. And they asked me to do the discussion or facilitate the discussion. And so when Stephan called me, he said, Pieter, so now I have time to prepare a good joke. And I said, you know what, interesting enough, the best joke I have now at the moment is about a farmer and a consultant. And it's a good joke. And then he kept quiet. It's that typical Stephan Schoeman silence. And you can hear no jokes, it's fine. We don't have to do a joke this morning. So we have limited time, but the joke is good. It's a brilliant one. Talking about pruning, and I think the parameters is maintenance pruning. Werner will start with the principles, what he is doing, what he believes in out of his experience, and then Andrew Sheard will comment on that. So he is the one in the not blue, Werner, and then Andrew will comment on that. He can answer to that, and then Warren from UVS Natal, he will handle the challenges. So that's the second one. First, the principles, what regime does he use and believe in, and then the next one is the challenges, what challenges he faces, and Alwyn will answer to that. And then lastly, Quentin, Elliot from the South Coast, he will handle the cost. So that was interesting. Try to get the best topics on top. The cost came out again and again. And now we understand so well why. So that's a very important one. I'll keep it last. Stephan Schoeman will comment on that, add to that, ask a question or two. And then Stephan will eventually then get all the ties together. So, you can kick the ball.
Ja. Baie dankie vir die geleentheid. Ek het baie lanklaas so uitgesien na iets, moet eerlik wees. Maar anyway, ons is hier so kom ons maak dit werk. Die pruning in general is a controversial topic on its own. On a high level, each area or each cultivar or farm is different, in a different stage. So I'll try and keep it high level and quick. I think with macadamias, we're learning as we go, and pruning is becoming more important. If you go back and compare us to the citrus industries and stuff like that, they'll talk about the cost, but we're not nearly putting enough effort into our pruning. But I think we do realize that. So on farm level, when I go and how can I say, get the guys to start pruning in the winter time, there's a couple of principles that comes up every time, and light interception is one. The height of the tree plays a role definitely for bearing, and airflow when it's a big thing as well. So ja, daar's 'n paar goedjies wat inkom. Die all-cut machine, we use it just when it's necessary. To be honest, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on the all-cut machine. I don't think we can discard it going forward, but at this current stage, we're only using it if the orchard is heavily overgrown. Pruning comes back to penetration as well for chemicals. As we all know, you can't penetrate the tree if it's not open enough. And the new thing that we're trying now out is a summer prune. So it's quite new. You have to have guts because you're pruning while there's nuts on the tree. So Stephan is a fertilizer expert, but it comes back to fertilization at the end of the day, the high ends that we're putting down, and So in general, that's my feeling. There's nothing else. I think just one comment. Pruning is a specialized job, and we get temps in to come and do the action, and then they leave the farm again. And I please want to ask you to please stop that. It's a specialized job. It's not your farm induna or supervisor that can do it. Get the right guy, get the right team, and let them stay on the farm. Because otherwise you'll start every year from scratch. And that's not good. Because when they halfpad deur die blokke, then it's a gemors. So stick with your team. Give them one action at a time. One action. If you want to prune 2 windows and skirt, prune the windows, let them start again and let them skirt. Don't give 2 actions, please.
Werner, just a quick one. Specific cuts that's important to you and that you will focus on and that you will look out?
Absolutely. Upright growing branches. Over time, I think that's quite important to get your verticals out. Horizontal is bearing better. So I'll focus on them. Again, you can always come back. You never can put anything back. So rather start, the farm manager must assess every block. And every cultivar is different, the growing pattern. And choose 4 branches. Again, give the instruction to the team. Prune 4 branches, let them finish the block, and the farm manager will assess again. And then you can go 2 more or 3 more, whatever you feel about that one. But thickness-wise, 5 rand and bigger is the term that we use for uprights, and you can't cut them all in one season, especially if you take a 814 or 816. It's not possible, so you have to do it over time. So that's,
Thanks a million.
Werner, just one of the the things that we always look at is the difference in the cultivars. How do you guys manage, say, an A4 versus a Beaumont?
Yeah, that's a good question. The A4 especially, to get height on an A4, so there's no central leader, defined central leader on an A4. It's a willowy tree. So we're trying to get a central leader out of that. And you, on the A4 later on, when it gets a little bit older, you've got that little pinch, that stomach at the bottom. I don't know if you all, but that's how we call it on the farm. So that is a challenge. So we skirt them a little bit higher, and we thin those stomach part a little bit out to cut back to the first split. To thin that out, because the penetration is difficult to penetrate the A4. But it all depends on your spacing again. So the second most controversial topic after pruning is spacing. So once they reach one another, they go up. So then it becomes easier. On the Beaumont, sure. They like to be pruned. The more you prune them, the better your yield the next year. Part of it. But I think they'll talk about percentages and how much to cut. Go for them. That's all I want to say. And at the bottom as well, you can cut them out as well, the Beaumonts.
Just one of the things with pruning, you've always got to try and get your vegetative reproductive balance there. And obviously you bring in the pest control, which we've heard from quite a few people. How do you get that balance right of pruning them too heavily and not getting them into vegetative stage the following year?
Yeah, sure. Why did you choose Andrew? No, very good question. I think one of the principles as well is consultants here. Why is your yield going higher and higher, and then at year 8, then it stops, and you get the moor in with the fertilizer guy or the consultant, you know? So the canopy, we only bed on the outside meter of the tree. So one of the principles that you need to focus on as well is to regenerate new growth inside your tree. I think that's quite important. So you want a new tree after 10 years. It's easier said than done. But you need to focus on getting that regrowth in the middle. I think to answer your question, Andrew, is I think the timing of your when you prune is quite important on that. While the tree is sleeping, but getting back to that is the summer prune. So you do your big cuts while you've got time in the winter, just after harvest, and then you'll be finished by 15th of June. And yeah, so I think then you go and do your big cuts and your smaller, and we're talking about specific strategic branches we can do after nut set, November, December. So I think to answer you on that, and then we have to play with the fertilizer, when and what we apply on the nitrogen.
Thanks a million. Just a last question to you. Put a Beaumont cut. You said you can prune them, they're going to gooi them. What percentage of the tree will you take off? We want a value.
Yeah,
percentage.
I think more important to me is the tree pruned correctly? I'm at that point. I know it's not the right answer, but I think with the Beaumonts and the dry flowers and the mold spectrum that we've had, it's more important for me to cut them back and get the vertical and out and the horizontal branches there, and yeah. So I don't put a percentage to it. We've got a gut feel between management and driving through the orchard. So if that is a good or a bad thing, I'm not sure yet.
Appreciate it. Dankie, Warren. Warren will discuss the challenges that he faces and yeah, put that to Alwyn.
Yeah, thanks, Pieter. Look, I think quite a bit of it's been answered by Andrew and my partner here. But yeah, look, in general, it's on our farm, we've followed the basic principles like has just been explained. So it's really just maintaining the tree in a space relative to its orchard, maintaining tree canopy density to optimize spade penetration and light penetration. But what I've found now over time, and it's nice that you'll hear what I say now and what Elsia spoke about earlier on, I think is going to count a lot. But on the farm that we're on, we've got two diverse areas. One's very, very sandy, white sand, looks like you're standing on Cape Vidal beachfront. And when we prune there, 816 or 788s, we get very little regrowth. Okay, and those trees there normally produce a tonnage double to the area on the other side of the farm, which is a red recent sand, slightly higher clay concentration or clay percentage. And there, when I prune, I get a massive regrowth, and the trees generally have a more complex internal growth. So my challenge really up until now has been what are the consequences of the pruning regime I follow? So up until now, a lot of the consultants come out and they say you've got to prune this, rejuvenate, open up windows. But I've never ever had an opportunity or an ability to now measure, well, I pruned like this, so, and what's the outcome? Keeping in mind, when I talk double, the Monzi farm, a sandy farm, in the last 3 years, they've averaged between 4.4 and 5.3 on those 816s. On the other farm, which we call our Mpangeni farm, where it's got the higher clay percentage, we sort of average between 2.6 and 2.7 on the same variety following the same pruning regime. So our belief is there's definitely a correlation between vegetative growth, sinks in carbohydrates, and then ultimately the tonnage you're going to achieve the next year. Werner's just alluded to a summer prune. We've just started it for the first time this year because our long-term strategy, I believe, is we've got to prune less more often. Okay, this business of pruning after harvesting, coming in hard, is hurting us. Also, when I drive around, so I see Quentin sitting next to me here, and I've been onto their farm, and I look at their trees. Their trees naturally don't have the internal complexity that ours do. So I think if we can overlay, like Elsie is alluding to, if we can overlay tonnages from previous years based on a pruning regime that's scored, I think as an industry we can grow fantastically from there. Yeah.
Thanks, Warren. So, the burning topic there is regrowth. Regrowth. Dank je,
Yeah,
Warren.
so Warren, I just want to ask, so in the past, did you guys really put the same effort into pruning than what you actually put into your irrigation and the fertilizing? Because for me, that's one of the topics the main principles we're actually missing in the industry. Because the canopy is actually building the carbohydrates and building the new regrowth that we need for the crop. And I see a lot of farmers is actually missing that point. They want to finish pruning quickly, they want to go hunt. It's hunting season, and they're all tired after harvesting. So, have you guys in the past put a lot of effort into that, or would you say you guys are focusing on it now, lately?
No, Alwyn, I believe we do. The chap sitting on your left is one of the chaps that help us. He advises us what to put down from a nutrient perspective. And it's the same on both farms, where we sandy and not. Pieter runs the nutrition side on the farm that I work on, and we are. But in particular this year, what we're really focusing on is trying to drop nitrogen at a different stage, including in October, stopping the application of nitrogen to limit the flush in November, hopefully to reduce the November drop. But the challenge still comes back to how do we monitor it? We don't have a platform that can really score because there's so many different variables. But just from a farmer's perspective, standing there, I definitely believe there's a correlation to soil type and the pruning regime you should follow. And there's definitely a reduction in crop with an increase in vegetative growth, which would be, nitrogen would be a contribution of it, but certainly pruning practices are, yeah. But I don't go hunting just after harvesting, no.
Yeah, I must say I've seen that it's almost easier when you've got a tree that's actually bearing quite well to keep it on bearing because of the pruning regime you follow on it, because it doesn't grow excessively. But I've seen this last 2 seasons with Beaumonts in general, the crop haven't been that high. So a lot of energy actually went into regrowth, and it densed up all the Beaumonts, and then we had reindeering, flowering, and all those things added up on the next year where the crop wasn't good. This last season, a lot of farmers have really moved away from making massive cuts, but rather uplifting that density in the canopy and getting airflow into the canopy and just looking at the regrowth, all those nice regrowth branches that can actually flower and bear nuts for you. And so far it looks good for the season. Hopefully we can keep up with that, but I think it's a mind change in the industry that we don't have to butcher the tree every time we see it, but rather look at what you've got in front of you and just nurture it. And in the citrus industry, they are moving a little bit away from making big window cuts, and I think we as an industry can learn from them as well, rather working on density and the height than just butcher the trees.
Would you give a percentage?
Yeah, it's a gut feel normally when I walk into an orchard to feel what percentage I would like to cut on the tree, and what the crop was on that orchard and how the regrowth respond. But Gavin, one day when we were in the orchard, he mentioned 15%, and I must say I like that figure. In the past we talk about 30%. I like more to go lighter. I think if it's a reconstruction of your tree, that's a different cut. But an annual cut, I don't like to go more than that 15% that he actually mentioned.
So Alwyn, as I hear you agree to go through, do your cuts, and then you can come back. If you're not happy, come back. And that's the one theme that I hear, and even from Warren. Do your cuts and come back.
Yeah.
And reassess it, reevaluate it, write it, and
Sorry, Alwyn. Definitely. I think the first intervention might be a little bit heavy to get the structure correct. But from there on, it's actually, we are now in a second or third year with this process. And I must say, second year is much quicker, actually. So, yeah.
I think the pruning teams, sometimes we like to give them different kind of cuts as well, because you don't want to overcomplicate it. You want to give them a simple recipe that the laborer can understand, and you can follow up with guys behind them to do the nitty-gritties. And I think that principle works quite nicely in the orchard. If you've got certain guys that make certain cuts, and they focus on that, rather than give a guy too much info and he must make a lot of decisions. Sometimes me and the farmer even differ. How does the laborer feel when he stands in front of the tree? So we must simplify the whole pruning process.
Would like to give a moment to Warren to say something about the scoring, rating the prune for the year.
Okay, so we've heard the theme, and it looks like the industry's got this similar sort of feel. So I think we have migrated from where we started. So I basically got top work, where I score between 1 and 5 based on the severity of the prune, thinning out, and then also limb removal. So 1 being very light, 5 being quite severe. And every single orchard that we go through, I go in there after and I audit what's actually been done, hand it over to Pieter. And we're in the process now of overlaying tonnages achieved in years to come based on a pruning regime followed the period before. I definitely agree with what Werner is saying here. I hope in the long run, and we'll hear about the costs just now, but pruning is a very expensive operation. But I believe if we do come back in summer and have the theme that less is more, I believe we'll be able to prune quicker, because pruning has up until now been a very costly exercise. And in doing less, I believe it will have an influence on tonnage, hopefully in the positive. Yeah.
Before I go to Quentin, one thing that I saw with you guys on Lavubu now is 1 row in a field with a pole in, and the manager, I haven't pitched it to Warren yet, but I will. The one manager is responsible for that line. So if you come to the field and you're not happy, and you ask the pruners or who's even in charge there in the Nduna, what you're looking for, you can go back to that line. The manager has to know what he did there. That is his prune. Just to have a visual, just to have a picture. This is what we want to aim for. And I don't know if you have a comment on that, but I like it. I like it. Even not in every field, but cultivars or teenagers opposed to mature. Choose a field, let the manager prune or be with the pruners to do 1 line. And that's a reference. Thanks, Quentin. Cost.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you, Pieter. Yeah, just to comment just on our strategy for pruning. I've got various size trees. Basically, our principles are, which is what Werner has said, keeping a central leader and then cutting 1 or 2 windows on either side and keeping the trees to sort of 6 meters and allowing them to grow out to sort of a maximum of 7 meters. That's our general principle for pruning. We prune annually. So I think that might also negate the fact of having to do big cuts. We believe in doing smaller cuts regularly, which we do as close after harvest as possible. And then we follow up generally 4 months later to manage that regrowth, breaking out the majority and selecting generally 1 or 2 lateral growers to follow out from that pruning point. So those are our basic principles that we apply to pruning. The equipment that we use is basically, we've just converted to battery-powered pole pruners. We just found them much more efficient and cost-effective with the increasing fuel costs. And then obviously we deal with what I call the processing of the mulch. We use a FACMA-type mulcher, and then smashing any wood up to 75 mil, anything larger, we'll drag out the orchard and chip it and add it back to our compost. So just to come to the costs. I've just done a couple of scenarios here, starting on a sort of 9-year-old orchard, which is 14 hectares. We would call it a farm on the south coast. I think it's just a block for you guys here in Mpumalanga. So our total cost for that, for the pruning, is 2,481 Rand. And what was quite interesting, I've never really scrutinized the cost, but what I've done is I've broken it down into 4 areas. So pruning, that would include the labor and the cost of the pruning equipment. Then the mulching, which would be your factor type mulcher to mulch your prunings. And then the side discharge to pick up that mulch. We use like a soil profiler to throw that back underneath the canopy. And then just the loading of the wood to extract that from the field. So this total cost of 2,481 on a 9-year-old block. The pruning labor is costing us 817 Rand a hectare. The mulching is 904. The side discharge is 680, and the loading of the wood is 80. So quite interestingly, with our increased cost of fuel, the mulching in this scenario is actually costing very similar to what the labor to prune the trees is actually costing, which is of quite a bit of interest to me. And then just going over to another 20 hectare block, also the tree age there is 20 years old. Our total cost to prune that is 5,500 Rand a hectare. The pruning labor and machinery is 2,500 Rand a hectare. The mulching cost is 2,065. The side discharge was 730, and the loading of the wood was 250 Rand a hectare, coming back to that total of 5,500 Rand per hectare. So the same sort of trend in that scenario. Then we took it to a 30-year-old block, 10 hectares. The total cost was 10,900. The pruning operation was 4,700. The mulching was 3,600. Side discharge was 1,680, and the loading of the wood was 870. So the total cost of that was 10,900 to prune a hectare. So yeah, that's basically our costs. And just from another just economic point of view, we just found if we took over farms with large trees, like those 30-year-old trees, we had to do corrective pruning. We were removing in excess of 30% of the tree canopy. We found that we dropped the yield by 20%, not just the following season, but the 2 seasons thereafter. So for 2 years, we dropped that yield by 20%. So the degree of pruning can have a significant effect on the following crop. Thanks.
Thanks a million. Thank you, Stephan.
Yeah, it sounds like the cost is about a quarter of your typical production cost.
Yeah, I think it's dependent. You know, our average cost is about 60,000 Rand a hectare, so that'll be about 15%, 10 to 15%, depending on the age of tree.
Yeah, so it's interesting to notice that the machinery portion is a significant carrier of cost in the pruning operation. It would be interesting, Werner, I don't know if you've costed out the use of the mechanical pruner per hectare. Yeah. One of the metrics that we don't have but would be interesting is to see what the cost or the benefit is of the pruning. Now, what we do an input of 10,000 Rand into a 30-year-old orchard, but what do we get for that? Normally, when we start becoming involved in a new operation, and it's an average farm with average yields, average fertilizing, average irrigation, average pruning, you have an almost immediate effect on yield by improving the pruning. So, yeah.
No, listen. I think people would like to you now give the comment or the question back. What is the effect? So if you spend, say, that 5,000 Rand scenario, how many kgs of nuts do you have to get to justify that one? If I make a quick calculation here, could it be about 250 kgs of nuts to justify a 5,000 Rand prune? and then you do it. Then you do it. Quentin?
Yeah, I think I don't have too much experience on the gain. Just having taken over farms, we've had to do corrective pruning. As I said, there initially is a loss, but there obviously was, increased penetration for sprays. The quality of the nuts improved. Keeping the tree heights maintained was obviously, and we managed to maintain once we've done those corrective prune and even tonnage, following thereon. But I think if you are going to leave it for 3 years and stagger it, I think you're going to have up, down, where if you're doing those annual cuts, you're going to keep that our experience has been you maintain an even yield for the crop to follow thereafter without that big cut, small cut. I think another big factor is obviously building capacity, not just relying on one pruning team as your area gets bigger to use and put more and more pruning team that you can basically try and finish within 2 months after harvest and follow on that 4-month cycle to manage that. When your farm gets bigger, don't try and use the same amount of staff carrying right forward. I think what we do lose crop if you're still pruning late into August when your flower initiation has taken place. So I think that's a critical factor, getting that pruning done quickly and building that capacity in order to do that. Otherwise, you do run the risk of losing crop because you're impacting the following crop by pruning a bit late.
Yeah, we often we have this ethical problem to cut out flowers, so that is difficult. But pruning during flowering also, you sit with a tree that's significantly more dense than the 2 weeks before and the 2 weeks after main flowering. So we tend to over prune or make bigger cuts when we prune during flowering. Yeah, so finishing beforehand is definitely more ideal. So we've also found that traditionally we started pruning directly after harvest, and that was mainly centered around the areas where we finished harvesting during winter. But some varieties, the Nelmax and some other earlier varieties, when we started finishing their harvest early to prevent things like splitting and so forth, we started pruning too early. And especially in the warm areas, we definitely pruned too early, and we sat with a lot of regrowth issues.
You want to add on to that, Andrew? I saw your head.
Yeah,
Stephan, I want to give this example from Juan yesterday. So there's the 2 farms, and the one on the right had a 41% TKR, 3.5 tons. So what he showed there, 8-meter high trees, opposed to the other one, 6 to 8 meters, so definitely a higher tree there. And then the one on the left had 0.76 unsound compared to the 3.1. So it's just like values. Can he get 1% off by bringing down that tree? If that is the issue, the height. And now sitting next to Alwyn, yeah. Let's hear.
So I don't know, 15 years ago, Schoeman said the 80% of the stinkbug damage comes from the top third of the tree. And then we weren't pruning so good either. So I definitely think that we get a lot of our damage from the top. We have seen that if you improve if you drop your unsound, you can easily increase your income by about 3-4% per percentage of unsound that you drop on a 30% sound kernel base. So
yeah, I feel sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction. You have a season where there's high unsound, and the next season the farmer cut off the tops, and there's regrowth and there's no nuts that coming season. So for me, it's not taking the top off completely, but it's thinning out the tops so that we can get the spray penetration still there. A lot of the spray machines are better than a few years ago. We can get up to 8 meters. So I believe, yes, but yield still outweighs quality. 4 ton at 3% unsound compared to 2.5 ton at 1% unsound. That sum is easy to make. So I like the yield. I think we can work on the quality afterwards.
Okay, so is that a yes to the 1%? 5 minutes. Ah, these guys are quick. Is that a yes? You can get 1% off. He will get a 2% if he bring down his tree.
Yeah, I think if you uplift the density, it's more on the tops of the density and the speed that the tractor move, like Gideon showed, to get to the penetration in those canopies. By butchering the tree, you actually sometimes just make it more vegetative, and the regrowth is quite severe. That comes back. Yes, it opens it up, but it doesn't take away your density. So you must uplift the density, and your regrowth will be less. So you want to set as big crop as possible, not for the reason just for your pocket, but for your tree to put the brakes on the regrowth as well, and then your penetration and everything will follow.
Thanks. Then I asked Stephan if he can maybe pick the one issue that's important to him at the moment, and that we've discussed now, and finish off with that.
So I think we've gone past the stage where we don't prune. With the canopy bearing surface migrated upwards in the time that we didn't prune. We know we can manage and we can harvest and we can do everything better in this 6 to 8 meter height spectrum. And I think that is where we should aim to manage our trees. I think the trend of thinning out the rumps of the trees has definitely improved our management of the fungal issues over the past couple of seasons. Whether you do it by removing uprights or thinning out layers or whatever, depending on the variety. I think it's commendable that farmers start training their own and keeping their pruning teams. There's enough pruning through the year to continue, and especially if there's expansions on the farm, those same people can be involved in rehabilitation of old blocks and training of younger blocks. Yeah, and I think the principles, although Werner said it's controversial, the reality is that we know that we need to rejuvenate the tree. It's a 30-year project that needs to continue. So we need to rejuvenate. We know that light's important and air movement. And I think the principles came out very well.
Thanks a million. I have 1 minute left. My worst fear if someone walk out of here and so what? I want to ask, is there anyone that heard something or think in a new way that he got something here? He drove far, but at least he heard one good thing. Is there one hand? One guy that learned something? We wasted our time. Please, Quentin.
I think the big thing that I picked up from that is less regrowth once you prune is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, for example, the fall farmer there is actually a good thing. And I think that's one thing that I do want to... I'll start again. So just speaking here, so I really, I cannot remember your name, apologies, but when you spoke about your 2 different orchards and how you'd have essentially the same pruning practice, and on one you'd have a rather vigorous regrowth and a lower yield compared to the other one, even though the one that you're yielding 4 tons on is on quote unquote significantly is on weaker soils. And you attributed that essentially to the regrowth vigor after pruning. And that's something that I've just take away, is that vigorous regrowth doesn't mean that the tree necessarily has energy for your yield. So we need to remember that as macadamia farmers, we are farming nuts, not wood.
Regrowth is really, everyone has a friend like regrowth. They're welcome, they can come and visit, but not all the year. Just, there's a space for them. Thanks a million, appreciate it.